Okay, so we'll get started with worksheet number 4. This is about relative clauses for my prose kids. So we talked in class about the different forms of the relative pronoun, qui, quai, quad. Remember that these clauses give me more information about a particular noun in the sentence. Key takeaways from our class yesterday: gender and number come from the word that's being modified. Case is about what it's doing inside of its own clause. So they're not always going to be the antecedent and the pronoun are not always going to be the same case. In fact, most of the time they probably won't be. All of these sentences on this worksheet were taken right from an author by the name of Eutropius, who we're actually going to be reading. So this is real Latin. This is what it looks like. So sometimes it follows the sort of rules that we're used to, and sometimes we have to adjust on the fly. Okay. So starting with our first sentence here, and this is the very first line of Eutropius. This is book 1. He says Roma in the nominative case. A Romulo. Exordium here, a neuter noun, could be nominative, could be accusative, but Rome is definitely my subject here, so this is going to be in the accusative case. Right? And then we have our verb habet. Third singular, right? Once we get past habet, we're into this relative clause situation. Because it's a clause, it needs to have a verb, so I got to keep going here. Qui rei Silviae vestales virginis filius erat. So the clause is going to be the rest of the sentence. Qui only has one possibility. Qui has to be nominative. Rei Silviae, Rea Silvia, the Vestal Virgin. This is one big old genitive here. And then we have a predicate nominative here in filius. So pretty straightforward sentence. The trickiest part of this sentence is knowing what he's talking about when he says Roma habet exordium. So literal translation, Rome has its origin a Romulo. It has its origin from Romulus. What he's really trying to say is that Rome began essentially with Romulus, right? Romulus is where Rome started, okay? So when you're translating, you can do a more literal translation. You can say Rome has its beginnings from Romulus, or Rome began with Romulus. Either one is fine with me. Now this qui, okay, it can't be talking about exordium because exordium is neuter, so it's got to be talking about Romulus. We have a feminine word in Roma, we have a masculine word in Romulus, we have a neuter word in exordium, so this masculine qui has to be talking about Romulus. And it makes sense because Romulus, who was the son of Rhea Silvia, and she was the Vestal Virgin. Son of the Vestal, Rhea Silvia. And you can say Vestal Virgin or you can just say Vestal, right? We know both terms. When we talk about the Vestals, we're talking about the Vestal Virgins. They were the priestesses who took care of the Temple of Vesta. So Rome has its beginnings from Romulus, who was the son of the Vestal Rhea Silvia. Romulus, who was the son, right? Romulus was the son of Rhea Silvia, so that's why we use the nominative for qui. Even though Romulo over here is ablative, he's ablative in this part of the sentence, but in this part he's the subject. Romulus was the son of the Vestal Rhea Silvia. Okay. Number 2, we skipped a couple sections. This is like section 3 or 4 in book 1. Tullus hostilius, bella. That's the war, Bella, not the beautiful things, Bella. Third singular, we have a perfect tense verb now. Reparavit. Albanos, clearly accusative, another third singular verb. And then we have our relative clause, right? Relative clause has to have a verb in it, so it's got to go all the way down to sunt. Of course that would happen. Let's take this down, 10.5. Hopefully you guys can still see that. Qui, again, in the nominative case, we'll talk about why. Ab urbe Roma, duodecimo miliario, those are both in the ablative as well, and then my verb sunt. Okay. So when we have a sentence with a relative clause, make sure you get the main clause first, and then you can hook on the relative clause afterwards. So what did Tullus Hostilius do? Reparo, literally he prepared again, he prepared again wars. So the idea here is that Tullus Hostilius, who was the third king of Rome? Third king of Rome, he brought back wars. So Romulus, the first king, was very bellicose, he was very warlike, and he waged a lot of wars. His successor, Numa Pompilius, was very peaceful, and Tullus came back and brought back war. Albanos Weekit, he defeated the Albans. That was the sort of sister city of Rome. It's actually where Romulus and Remus came from. They were from Alba Longa. They weren't from Rome because there was no Rome. So he defeated those people. He defeated the Albans. Qui, we're talking about the Albans. The Albans who sunt are ab urbe Roma, away from Rome, duodecimo miliario. Duodecimo miliario, a miliarius, or miliarium, might be neuter, is a milestone. And not in the colloquial English sense now of what a big milestone in your life. The reason those are called milestones is because in ancient Rome, there were actually stones that marked how many miles away you were from the city. So if you imagine you're driving down the highway and you're looking at those signs that tell you it's 10 miles to Rome, it's 9 miles to Rome, it's 8 miles to Rome, they would just put stones on the road, and it would actually say 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever, so you knew how many miles away you were. So when it says they are duodecimo miliario in the ablative case, they are at the 12th milestone from the city of Rome. So to translate that, instead of saying they are at the 12th milestone away from Rome, we can just say that they are 12 miles from Rome. So I'm okay with you guys in prose kind of giving the more English translation. It doesn't have to be quite so literal. If you want to make sure you know exactly what's happening, we have ablative of place, where, which does not use in here because just the way that milestones worked. And then ab urbe Roma would be place from which, you could call it. I'm not too big on all of those fancy little ablatives, but just want to make sure you guys know why they're in the ablative case. It's all about place, right? Place and time. Okay, Camillus. So this is now into the Roman Republic. Camillus, eo anno, those words can only be ablative together. Anno could be dative or ablative, but eo has to be in the ablative case. Volscorum in the genitive. Civitatem. Then we have our quae. So we have our relative clause. Quae per septuaginta annos bellum gesserat vicit. So we have two verbs here. The verb in the clause is gesserat, and the main verb is vicit. And you're going to see this a lot. Number one, the fact that you have two verbs sitting right next to each other with no et in between them. They're in different tenses, which means they're probably doing something different. And typically, if your main verb is in the past, you can expect to have a pluperfect, right? Past, past. Quae can mean many, many different things. It's talking about this civitatem. That's the only feminine thing we've encountered so far in this sentence, so that limits it to just the feminine possibilities, which means nominative singular or nominative plural. And since city is singular, it's the nominative singular form. Per septuaginta annos, that's a prep phrase. Bellum gesserat, that's third singular, that's a pluperfect. And then my main verb at the end here, vicit, that's third singular perfect. Okay, so we always have the outside part, the main clause, and then we hook the inside part onto it. So Camillus, my subject, then we need our verb, which is all the way down here at vicit. Camillus defeated the civitatem Volscorum, the community of the Volsci, the city of the Volsci, the citizenry of the Volsci, all of that is just kind of just saying he defeated the Volsci, the tribe. And honestly, they would have been more of a tribe than anything else. He defeated the tribe, the citizenry, the city. I mean, he defeated the Volsci. That's really what it means. Okay, he defeated the Volsci eo anno. So maybe he defeated them that year. So I'm just going to put that at the beginning just to get it out of the way. That year, Camillus defeated the Volsci. Quae. Since they're a tribe, we would probably say who. If you really went and said the city of the Volsci, then maybe you could say which. Who gesserat, who had waged bellum, war, of course. Now this is something that in earlier Latin you're not going to have this word per. In earlier Latin they would just say Septuaginta annos. They started using per later on. So waged war for 70 years. It would be grammatically enough to just have Septuaginta annos. That would be the accusative of duration of time. But in later Latin, they started using the preposition. So that tells you that the language was changing a little bit. So that year, Camillus defeated the Volsci, defeated the city of the Volsci, the citizenry of the Volsci. He defeated the Volsci, who had waged war for 70 years. They were always nipping at Rome's heels, as it were. First two words in this line, finito bello. Oh boy, if you guys haven't learned this about me yet, I am a sucker for a good old ablative absolute. Okay, I don't know why, I just like them. Then we have our relative clause here starting at quod. Quod per viginti tres annos tractum est. We have our verb tractum est, so that's where my clause ends. Romani legatos ad Aegyptum miserunt. So this is an interesting thing. You don't see this in classical Latin too often, where you have an ablative absolute and then a relative clause kind of hooked onto it. Caesar would never really do this. Livy would certainly never do this. This is a later thing. This is written about 300 years later. So these are signs that the language was getting a little bit, it was changing a bit. So quad here, which, because we're talking about a war, we have a passive verb, tractum est. So it's the war which per viginti tres annos, again, same situation as we had before. Tractum est, third singular perfect passive. Traho means to drag. So if you think about the idea, the war which had been, or which was dragged through 23 years, we wouldn't say it was dragged through that many years. We would probably say it dragged on for 23 years, or it lasted for 23 years. And then we get into our actual sentence. So we have our subject, we have our direct object, we have a little place to which, and then we get our actual verb, right? So remember ablative absolutes, right? We translate them with, or, after, or since, or because. I'm going to go, I think here, after the war. Yeah, I'm going to say after, right? So after the war, the bello, now we're going to put the relative clause right after it, which was dragged on for 23 years. But I still got to get that finito, so that's my second half of my ablative absolute. After that war was ended, finito, after it was a finito, the Romani, the Romans, miserunt, sent, legatos, you're going to look it up and you're going to find like envoys or ambassadors, legates, sometimes it's just the English, messengers, somebody to communicate, right? So we can call them whatever we want, ambassadors. And they sent them to Egypt, ad Aegyptum. Okay. I'm just going to move this down here. The Romans sent ambassadors to Egypt. When did they send them? After the war, which had dragged on for 23 years, was ended. It is in the nominative case here because the war was dragged on for 23 years. Postpugnam, another prep phrase here. Multi civitates, my nominative subject. Quae, okay, there's my relative clause start. Quae Romanis paruerant. So that's my verb, and also the fact that it's pluperfect. That's typically what you're going to see, especially in history. So the states, the cities, which Romanis could be dative or ablative, but this verb pareo, which means to obey, goes with the dative case. So that's why we've got a dative here. And my verb is third plural, pluperfect. And then outside we have our main clause. Say can be ablative or it can be accusative. Third plural perfect here for transtulerant. The verb here being transfero, to transfer, I need a direct object. They transferred se. They transferred themselves ad Hannibalem. So postpugnam, little prep phrase to start, after the fight, after the battle. Multi civitates, many citizenries, tribes, groups of people. Sometimes it's just used for cities, right? Many cities which had obeyed the Romans literally transferred themselves, and you think of this idea of like loyalty or, you know, whatever. So maybe not transferred themselves to Hannibal, but literally brought themselves to Hannibal, brought themselves over to Hannibal. They switched allegiance is essentially what it is. They, you know, transferred themselves, so terrible, to Hannibal, meaning that they switched sides, transferred themselves or switched sides. I feel like the longer I do this job, the worse I get at like finding English words. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what it means in Latin, and then I try to think of the English words, and I'm like, I don't know how to say this in English. All right, and then we get the big long one here. So kind of two lines for the price of one, but it's right from Eutropius. Is, that little word is, I'm just gonna scooch this down for now so it's all together. Is primus, which is a word that you don't often see. It is the nominative pronoun, is id, used here for emphasis. The idea being he was the first, and that's what it means when you have primus. We have our verb vicit, helvetios is my direct object. Then we have our relative clause here, qui, down to appellantur. So he first, or he was the first, right? He was the first to vicit. And I know that having that to there feels weird, but it would be like saying Caesar first defeated. Yeah, that's fine too. I like that. He was the first to. Both are good. He first defeated the Helvetians, and if you guys remember your Caesar from last year, that's your first Gallic tribe when you go across the Alps. So that would basically be Switzerland today. In fact, they still refer to themselves as Helvetians or Helvetica, I think. He first defeated the Helvetians, qui, who, nunc sequani appellantur, for the French students. Appel, right? Call. So this is third plural present passive. So he first defeated the Sequani, or sorry, he first defeated the Helvetians, who are now called the Sequani. So he first did this, and then deinde. We have our little adverb here. Ooh, those are tiny. Oops. We'll go 10. There we go. He first defeated the Helvetians, who are now called the Sequani, and then vincendo. So we have a gerund here in the ablative. ablagur. Per bella gravissima usque ad oceanum Britannicum processit. And there's my second verb. Third singular. Perfect. So he first defeated the Helvetians, and then Winkendo, by conquering, by defeating, right? Then, by defeating, by conquering, per bella gravissima, through very serious wars, right? Very heavy wars, processit. He proceeded all the way to the, it says the British Ocean. We would probably refer to this as like the English Channel, right? I think that's what we're going for here. Not quite an ocean, but the part of the ocean that's right next to Britain. So the idea, if you know your geography, is he's going all the way through what is now Switzerland, all the way through France, and all the way up to the top of Europe, where you have the English Channel that you would cross over to go to Britain. And he actually did send some people to Britain, but they never really conquered Britain. At least not until a little bit later. Julius Caesar did not get credit, or does not get credit, for conquering the British, the rando tribes that lived on the island of Britain. Okay? And that leaves us with a verb synopsis. So let me get my boxes all in a row here. Gotta do all my clicky clicks first. That looks good. That looks good. Sometimes I remember to do this beforehand, and sometimes I don't. Okay. The verb is operio, operire, operui, and opertus. It is to cover. It's actually the opposite of aperio. Aperio is to open. Operio is to close, or to cover. First plural and feminine, we've got a we've got a fourth conjugation verb, operire. So we have operi. Oops, I never turned on my long marks. Okay. There it is. Operimus and operimor. Actually, I can make these a little bit bigger as well. Now we're cooking. Since it is third IO or fourth in this case, we have operiebamus and operiebamor. And then for future, we keep the I, operiemus and operiemor. Okay. Perfect active is always third principal part, so operui, operuimus, operueramus, and operuerimus. And anything perfect passive is going to be your fourth principal part. First plural feminine, so opertus becomes opertai. Sumus. Oh, it changed opertai to operate. Don't do that. Opertai. It's going to keep doing that to me. Eramus. And opertai. Erimus. Okay. So the first six forms are based on the first and second principal part. These three are based on the third principal part. These three are based on the fourth principal part. The commands, we have oops, gotta change these two. Yeah, we should be okay. So we have operi and operita. Yeah. And then to make them the future commands, we have operito and operitota. So we have the operi and operito, operite, operitota. Participles, we have operi. Keep forgetting to do this. Should just do it all at once. That's not a valid number. How about 16? There we go. So my participle, we have operientes. Nothing here. Nothing here. Those are people who are covering stuff. Opertai, which is going to autocorrect on me. Opertai, that is stuff that's been covered. Operturai is, those are people who are about to cover something. And operiendi are things that must be covered. And this is physical covering. Just to make sure that's, we're talking about like, you know, putting something on top of something else. Operire, for my gerund, I get operiendi, operiendo, oops, don't need that long mark, operiendo, operiendum, operiendo. So it's the I and the E for this form. Infinitives, often used in indirect statement, we have operire. Passive would be operiri. Perfect active, operuissa. Perfect passive, opertai or opertas essa. Os, because oftentimes it would be in the accusative for indirect statement. Operturai or operturas essa. And then this guy is always opertum iri. We don't care as much about that guy, though. And finally, see if we can sneak this in within 30 minutes, our subjunctives. We have, I'm going to remember this time, 16. Operiamos, right? We keep the I and we add the A. Operiamur. Imperfect subjunctive is second principal part. Operire plus mus. Operiremus. And operiremur. So that is your second principal part. Operire plus mus. Operire plus mur. Perfect active. Operuerimus. And pluperfect, operuissemus. So this one kind of looks like future perfect. And this one is your infinitive, operuissa plus mus. And then over here, opertai, which is going to autocorrect on me. We use our subjunctive forms of sum, so simus, which I think technically is simus. And opertai, yep. Essemos. All right, I think this one's going to come in about 28 minutes or so. So we should be good. We will have our quiz tomorrow. So if you have any questions about relative clauses, feel free to swing by office hours today. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in class tomorrow. Bye.